The greatest gift that we can give ourselves, our loved ones, and the world as a whole is to be ourselves. Again, how we go about that, well, that's where happiness comes in. That's where emotional intelligence comes in. That's where conflict resolution, that's where all these skills that you share on this podcast come in as a path to living a life that is true to us, that is authentic, and that is deeply, deeply happy and fulfilling.
In 1837, Horace Mann created the education system, a system at the time designed to pump out factory workers and professors. The same system that is still being used today in the 21st century. Now, Mann's system is backfiring. We are being moulded by the same industrial system that has existed for close to 200 years. That system delivers us into a digital economy that has no need of our outdated skills. This isn't our teachers' fault. This isn't the government's fault. This is due to a rapidly changing world full of technology and unforeseen circumstances. And us Gen Zs are caught in the middle. Welcome to the Driven Young Podcast, the podcast for stressed, overwhelmed young Australians, teaching you practical life skills you can implement now to set yourself up in life. And now your host, Byron Dempsey.
Welcome back to the Driven Young Podcast, and today we are talking all things happiness and gratitude. So many people are so negative, the news is so negative, and so much of what we consume is negative, and all of this can have a serious effect on us. So today I brought on a happiness expert and researcher, Declan Edwards. I met Declan on Clubhouse and he blew my friends and I away with some awesome stuff he was saying. So much so that we've since become friends, and I invited him on the podcast to share his knowledge with you all. Declan is the founder of the company BU. He is a Bachelor of Health, Postgraduate Certificate in Positive Psychology, and has a Practitioner Certificate in NLP, CBT Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. His entire company is based on the science of happiness, which I know sounds bizarre, but they do some seriously cool stuff in this company. In today's episode, we get into Declan's story of how he didn't do what his parents wanted him to, the top regret of the dying, why motivation isn't always good, social media and mental health, being vulnerable, what the goal of your 20s should be, how to focus on positive rather than negative, and so much more. This episode also comes with a free gift. I've added 2 downloadable PDFs with some super powerful questions we discuss on the episode. They are completely free and you can find the link in the show notes. I highly recommend checking them out and answering those questions. As per usual, guys, please DM myself or Declan if you enjoyed this episode. You can buy me a coffee to help support the show at the bottom of the show notes. Please consider leaving a rating review on Apple Podcasts. And I've just launched my new online coaching program where you can spend one-on-one time with me live as I teach and mentor you all the things I think we should have been learning in school to set you up for life. All the links are in the show notes below or my Instagram bio. Now, over to Declan.
All right, Declan, welcome so much to the show.
Mate, thanks so much. Pumped for it.
Really excited for this. We are actually met on Clubhouse.
Yes.
Which for any listeners out there, Clubhouse is a new social media app platform that I'm going to be kind of doing a solo episode on later. So maybe we'll touch on that a little bit. But before we get into happiness, gratitude, all that fun stuff that you do, I'd love to know a little bit more about you, who you are and what you did after high school.
Yeah, so after high school, I immediately went to university because I thought that's what I was meant to do to be happy. I was like, well, that's what I've been told is the path to success, so let's go ahead and do that. I originally studied journalism because I wanted to be the host on Getaway and thought that was the quickest path to get there. And I remember I was writing a lot of uplifting content, and one of my lecturers at uni said, you need to change the way you're writing if you're going to have a career in this path, because the saying in media is if it bleeds, it leads. You can't make happy content and be successful. So I left and then went and studied a Bachelor of Health, did my postgrad in Positive Psychology, and that's what led me to fall more and more in love with the science of happiness. And really that's what makes me tick, is understanding what happiness is, why it matters, and how we can all be happier. Because I believe that when we feel good, we do good things. So if people know how to be happier, they'll naturally do good things in the world, and it'll spread this beautiful ripple effect.
Yeah, awesome. Because like when we met you, you just jumped into one of our Clubhouse rooms and like in your bio, it's like happiness expert. I'm like, well, what does this mean? And you just started spitting facts, just throwing all this stuff at us. We all fell in love. We're like, oh, we got to meet this guy. So now here we are, which is really exciting. And I love how you made the point, if it bleeds, what was it?
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, like controversy is king, right?
Yep.
Which is, if you look at TikTok and a lot of the stuff with Gen Z, that's, the biggest people are the ones with the drama. The Kardashians, Logan Paul,
Maths.
Yeah. Logan Paul's biggest growth was after the Suicide Forest incident. When he just blew up. That's when he had his biggest growth. That's when he got his most subscribers. Same with James Charles. He lost a lot of subscribers after his drama, then he just blew up. And so it's really cool to see that you've really followed your passion, which is happiness, regardless of what, the world says, where if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, I think I still felt trapped to that a few times as well, growing BU as a movement, which is the organization that I run. there were still times when I was like, oh, well, we need to create more controversial content to get eyes on it, to get views on it. And I felt myself falling into that trap and very quickly becoming disconnected from the message we were actually sharing with the world. I remember I had to sit down with my team a couple of years ago and go, guys, this isn't us. Like, this doesn't feel like what I want to share and contribute. And we're so busy playing someone else's game or playing by someone else's rules, I think we lost touch of why we were doing this in the first place. So I'm the first to admit, I think a lot of people make the mistake that because I study happiness and because I've been practicing this for quite a long time, you know, I'm always happy and I always get it right. I don't. Like anyone else, I still have my days, I still have my moments, and I still have those times where I fall into the trap of playing life by someone else's rule book or by someone else's definition of success. And that was one of those moments where I was like, we're not being true to ourselves here. Fortunately, now we're a lot better at it.
Well, one of the biggest regrets of the dying is I wish I lived a life more true to myself rather than lived a life that others expected of me.
Yes.
Which is exactly what you're saying here. Because especially as Gen Zs, you know, I feel like we live in a world where we can compare ourselves to so many other people online and we realize how good some other people have it. And we're kind of going, actually, I don't want to live a life that society expects of me. I want to live a life more traveling, more experience more things of what my parents, my grandparents were able to experience, because a lot of that is cheaper and far more accessible nowadays.
I love, just on a side note, I love that someone else knows the common regrets of the dying, mate. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, you know?
Yeah, so Bronnie Ware, for those who are listening to the podcast who don't know, an Australian palliative nurse, did the longest running study on what do people regret on their deathbed. And you're right, one of the number one regrets was I regret not living a life true to myself, but living a life by other people's expectations. Interesting enough, in the top 5 as well is I wish that I'd let myself be happier. And I find the framing around that really interesting. Like, I wish I'd let myself be happy. Like, I wish I gave myself permission to actually do things.
Because we're our toughest critic, right?
Exactly.
No one's tougher on yourself than you.
100%.
And so that's so important. Like, let yourself be happy. It sounds silly, but like, once you start to kind of think about it and go, yeah, actually, I do need to let myself be happy. It is okay to take a break. It's okay to, you know, relax and have fun. Because I think, especially I'm in, you know, kind of entrepreneurship world, which is very go, go, go. And that is my logic is, you know, work hard while you're young so you can kind of reap the rewards when you're older. But it's still important to take breaks and, you know, to have fun and enjoy your 20s. Gary Vaynerchuk, whenever he gets asked a question, what would you tell your younger self? Have fun. He's like, I'd tell my younger self to have fun and enjoy my 20s because all he did was work. And so, yeah, it's such an important thing.
Yeah, I've had such a, I'm going to say, difficult and fluctuating relationship with Gary V's content, but it's been really nice to see him over the last few years lean more and more into the idea that the greatest success in life is happiness and living a life true to yourself. I think it's been cool to see almost his journey as well, from being that very hustle and grind mentality to more living aligned as a mentality.
Yeah, he has definitely pivoted from, because he was very, very hustle. And I think it was good for me because it kind of woke me up to how hard I should be working. But then I started hustling, and I've spoken about this on the show before, people get into the personal development world and they just consume it nonstop. Every time they're in the car, every time they're walking, they've got to be listening to a podcast, they've got to be listening to an audiobook or whatever it is, to the point where it's like you never let yourself just relax. And yeah, and
sometimes it's a really easy place to hide. What I mean by that is I meet a lot of people who are like, oh, well, I listen to Gary Vee and Eric Thomas and Tony Robbins and I go to the conferences. I'm like, yeah, but are you doing any of the work?
Well, people go to Tony Robbins, you know, 7 times in a row. If the conference was so good, why are you going for the 7th time? Right. And I think going multiple times is great because it's, you know, inspirational.
You'll learn something new each time.
Great community and all that sort of stuff. But if you're in the same spot as you were, you know, 3 years ago, it's probably just a hit of motivation, which then, you know, goes down after a few weeks. I'm actually part of a community which is kind of like Tony Robbins for teenagers. And we have to say to them during the camps and the events, we do a whole, you know, 20-minute section. Look, you're going to go home, you're going to be on this high, and your parents and your friends are going to have no idea what you're talking about. And it can be really painful because you're all excited. You say, I want to do this. And they're like, what are you talking about? And so we have to teach them to like prepare for that after the event and after the camp.
Which is a really cool thing to do because it's also giving them permission to be internally driven rather than externally driven, right? I think there's such a mistake that people make these days where they crave and chase motivation, and motivation is not the answer. Like, motivation is so overhyped these days. You can get motivated by anything, like listen to a new Beyonce song, whatever you want to do, like listen to a speaker. Motivation, I describe it as like motivation is the flick of the match that lights the flame. But if you just stand there holding a burning match and you do nothing with it, what's going to happen? You're going to get burnt.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where they go, oh, maybe I did something wrong. I need more motivation. I'm like, no, what you need to do is take that spark of motivation and put it to something. And I think that's where inspiration comes from, like within. So knowing what you're about, knowing what you stand for, knowing what you want your life to look like, knowing what your blueprint for happiness and success is, not anyone else's. And being able to, yes, take external influence and yes, take external motivation, but then apply it to that, that's the secret sauce.
Exactly. And so many people just want motivation. Like, because motivation, as you mentioned, especially now with technology and everything, it's so easy. And that's something I want to do with my podcast, because I listen to a lot of podcasts and I started to notice this trend where they're all pretty similar and they'd spit all this great stuff, but none of it was like, what do I do with it now? You'd read books, how many people read Atomic Habits and then never changed their habits? But they say, oh, it's such a great book. It's, one of the best books I've ever read. Well, what did you do with it? Did you change your habits? Did you implement what he said? I guess most people didn't, including me. I didn't do everything he said. And that was a part, like last year, I was like, I just need to stop getting motivated and start implementing. And then that's kind of where I've had the most success that I've found.
Yeah. And it reminds me of the saying, so often when I speak, I say, complete the sentence. I say knowledge is, and of course everyone in the audience goes power. And I go, that is one of the biggest lies that you've ever been told. Knowledge is potential power. But if you do nothing with it, if you just let it sit there, nothing's going to change. I think that's what goes wrong a lot in personal development, in well-being, in psychology, whatever it may be. People seek out this shiny new answer. They're like, what's the big new fancy thing that's going to make me super happy in life? I'm like, to be honest, a lot of it's probably not going to be that mind-blowing or surprising for you. It's just you need to go and implement it and do it consistently. If
information was all we needed to be successful, we'd all have, big billionaires.
Google would have solved everything.
Yeah.
Solved everything, sorry.
How do you lose weight? Work out in a calorie deficit, essentially. It's kind of simple when you look at that sort of stuff, but it's not information. It's, you've got to be consistent, motivation, all those other things that on top of it where you get results. And that's where, listening to podcasts and reading books and all that can be detrimental because it's all information and information is everywhere. Like I think we consume more information than our grandparents did in like a day than they did in like a year or like, 6 months or something. It's insane how much information I consume every day. And so information isn't the problem, it's actually doing it and implementing.
And figuring out which information aligns with you.
Yeah.
Like I'm the first to say, I said it this morning on the podcast I was on, but I don't have the one size fits all answer to happiness. And please don't take my word for gospel. Right? I think if you listen to what I share and what the research says, I describe it like going into a store and trying on a new outfit. Right? There's all this stuff there that's, yes, legitimate and good and they're real, but they're not all going to be your size, your style, your color, your flavor, like fantastic. So when I make recommendations for people, even if I'm on, especially when I'm on podcasts or on stage, it's talking to multiple people. People are like, I'll go away and try that and it didn't work for me. I'm like, cool, you just ruled something out.
Yeah.
Try a different outfit now. Try a different approach. But when you find something for you that you're like, oh, that hit home, that resonates with me, that's going to improve my happiness and well-being, amazing, double down on it.
Yeah, it's the same with the show. Like my target audience, I say 16 to 22, there's so many different people in that audience. You could have guys, you could have girls, they could be poor, they could be rich. It's like, I can't just do an episode that's going to suit all of you. You have to take the information you use and think, how does this work for me? I've actually got a book coming out and I wrote a chapter for it and I cut it out of this chapter, but I'll put it in a later book. But I like to take people who I idolize. I like to take my favorite parts from them. There's no one person that I want to be. So like Gary Vaynerchuk, I idolize how hard he works. I'll take that. Joe Rogan, I idolize him as a podcaster. I'll take that. Or there's other people who have like great patience and have focus and all these different skills. And I try to take that. And so it's like, take what you like and apply it to yourself. And once you understand everyone's different, I think that's a sign of intelligence instead of just believing anyone to their word. Like you said, like the gospel, like think for it yourself, critical thinking.
Yeah. And not only do I hope other people do that with what I share, but I also like getting to do that with myself. So for example, my team at the moment, our creative director, Nate, is doing a new segment on our Facebook where he shows me some of the first videos we ever put out on social media around happiness and well-being and gets a live reaction from me. And some of them I'm like, yep, I still stand by that. Fantastic. I love it. I'd still share that message and shout it from the rooftops. And other ones I look at it and go, oh, buddy, if only you knew.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great sign. Right? I think it's a good sign that I'm growing, I'm learning, I'm developing, and I'm okay with being wrong. If something comes out and goes, hey, there is a better way to do this. In my industry, in particular in positive psychology, the half-life of knowledge, which is how long does it take before everything we thought we knew is proven wrong or there's a better way discovered? It's a year and a half. Really? In my industry. So every 18 months, everything I thought was going to help people, there's either a better way that's been discovered or it's been proven literally wrong.
Yeah, wow.
And I think there's a lot of humility in that to go, this could work really well for now, but there's probably going to be something else that comes along and helps people past this. And that's okay. It's part of the journey.
But if you had that mindset of like, it changes in 18 months, I won't bother starting now, nothing will get done.
Exactly.
And as you said, like Martin Scorsese says, if your first draft doesn't make you feel physically sick, then you've done something wrong. I look back at my videos, my first podcast and stuff, and like I've improved a lot since then. And so you've just got to start implementing. It links back to what we said before. You can everyone talks about starting a podcast. Everyone, and then 85% of podcasters only make it to 7 episodes because the motivation dies down, which links back to what you said earlier on. But we've kind of gone on a bit of a tangent here. So what do you actually do? We've just mentioned some happiness. You got BU or something. Do you want to give us a rundown of like what you actually do and what your company is all about?
Yeah, so I run a social enterprise called BU Coaching, just the letters BU, which stands for, everyone always asks, like, what does the BU stand for? I'm like, BU.
Oh, right.
Be yourself. Yeah, which is basically what I realized. But it's like, from my perspective, that is the greatest gift you can give yourself, your loved ones in the world. To show up authentically and wholeheartedly as yourself.
And it's so important now because we're not ourselves.
And it's so hard to do.
Social media, we want to be a perceived version of what people want us to look like on social media as opposed to be our raw, authentic self.
Exactly. And so from my perspective, I was like, what's going to make the biggest driver in people's happiness? I think it's that, developing the skill sets required to be truly and deeply and authentically ourselves and live a life in alignment with that. So I became fascinated by, well, what does it take to do that? What are the internal skill sets we're not taught in schools? Where can we access these? What's the evidence say? I didn't want to be just like another Instagram sort of life coach sort of thing.
Hey,
I was like,
be happy.
Exactly. And don't get me started on the positive thinking movement. That's a whole nother story. But so I wanted something that was tangible and practical that people could sink their teeth into. So I went and studied positive psychology and went, let's really lean into these questions now of what is happiness? What does it mean to be happy? How do we build happiness? How do we be authentic and true to ourselves? And basically we set up, I guess, kind of an online college. Like our members refer to themselves as freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year. Depending on who their head coach is their house. So the people I coach directly are on team Delta Epsilon. If they work with Jess, they're with Phi Beta.
Yeah.
And so we've really created this culture where I think mental health often is presented in a way that's not fun and not engaging. And so therefore it's really reactive. People won't do anything about it till it hurts.
If we have negative associations with mental health, why would we ever want to associate ourselves?
Exactly. And so we went, can we make thriving and well-being and happiness and mental health fun? Can we make it community-based? Can we make it evidence-based? And that's what we've done for the last 4.5 years. And I'm actually really grateful. I don't think we've announced this on a podcast yet, so this might be a hot take. As of last year, 2020, we won Social Enterprise of the Year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because of it, which
awesome.
we're really grateful for. And basically that's what's led me to where I am today.
Unreal. Like, it's such an important thing because mental health is such a hot topic for this podcast because it's aimed at Gen Z. I'd love to get your opinion. What have you seen with mental health in Gen Z? I mentioned before, I'm part of a community for younger people, and Brent, who runs that, he said, 20 years ago, no one even knew what anxiety meant, but now it's like catching the cold. Every second kid in the events has anxiety or has some form of depression or something. Is it because it's become more normalized and they had it before and now we're just, we've got a way to show it? Or is it because there's social media and all this stuff affecting us where we do have these problems? Like, what are you seeing in that area?
I think it's a combination of both. So I think, yes, we're having the conversations more and there's more awareness there. So literally, if it's not in our language, there's no way for us to express it. The fact that we now have language around it is amazing. Yes, there's societal factors to it as well. And obviously things like social media, but also a lot of things that we don't know the longevity of yet. Like, we don't know how this is going to affect people long term. I mean, social media is a relatively new phenomenon in the lifespan of human history.
Yeah.
But I think another thing that maybe is a bit of an issue that I'm seeing in mental health, especially in our generation and younger, is there's a lot of talk and awareness campaigns and not many practical implementation or action campaigns.
This is what I'm saying. This is what we were saying before. Just information, awareness, but there's nothing actually happening.
Yeah.
Not nothing, but there's little compared to how much, awareness there is.
So don't get me wrong, like, I love things like Are You Okay Day? But I think in and of itself, it's not enough to actually make sustainable and systemic change.
Yeah.
There needs to be, after we start having those conversations, we need to be empowering people with these tools that are evidence-based, they're practical, they're tangible, to go, this is literally how you increase your happiness and look after yourself.
Well, that's what, so the event is called Empower You that I'm talking about.
Amazing.
For young people. And we do this. We do, getting out in comfort zones, goal setting, we do money and finance, all practical stuff. Everything we can jam into 2 days, that's what we teach. And like Brent was saying, his dream would be of Scott Morrison was listening, at the beginning of every year, year 7, so when everyone's coming in fresh, we do like a 2-day workshop with them and we can combine the whole year group together, because how many kids don't talk to everyone in the year group? Well, they could be strangers and you're together for 6 years. I was like that. I had people I never spoke to. And so if you can combine everyone together, we separate the people who came in together from primary school and, unite them, that could solve a lot of these problems, because I'm actually starting to go in and speak at schools. And one of the girls, I had a Zoom chat with her and she said, what do you want to cover? And she's like, we just want to be united. Like, we feel so disconnected. We don't know each other. And we're in year 12. We've been together for 6 years, which is just crazy.
There's and this isn't just off the back of 2020 and everything that happened throughout 2020, we have been facing as a society a pandemic of loneliness for many years. We are the most connected we've ever been in history and simultaneously the most disconnected.
100%.
And that needs to change. Like, there's a lot of research in mental health around the solution is actually connection-based. And what I mean by that is connection to ourself. So what does it mean to be Declan Edwards? What does it mean to be myself? Like, what do I believe in? What do I stand for? What do I like? What do I dislike? A lot of people aren't asking those questions. Then it's connection to others. So yes, community and our peers. And then it's connection to something greater than ourselves. Now, I don't necessarily mean religion or something like that or a higher purpose. I mean connected to something bigger than us in terms of meaning, in terms of purpose, in terms of contribution, feeling like we're part of a movement or part of something bigger, we know is really beneficial for our mental health. So like when you look at, unfortunately, our generation, man, I grew up, didn't learn much about connecting with myself at all. I didn't learn much about how to actually deeply and authentically and genuinely connect with others. For most of my life, I was what I like to call a human chameleon. I was a pro at being what everyone else wanted me to be.
That's what we said, wearing masks. Your different masks that you would put on with different groups. So you go to this group, you put this mask on. You go to this group, you put this mask on. You go to this group, you put this mask on. How often is your mask off and just showing your true self?
And it's tiring to hold the masks on.
It's exhausting.
I remember a lot of my early work with some of my early coaches and mentors. Now, I actually hired my first coach to start learning this stuff and reconnect with myself and learn the basics of happiness and positive psychology and everything when I was 19. I think it was one of the best things I ever did, but I remember it was such a weird decision at the time. You know, I'm looking around at my peer group and everyone's buying their cars, they're, doing all that. And I'm like, I'm gonna pay this guy to just ask me really deep questions about life and we'll see what comes of it.
It would still be weird now today.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Exactly. And I think it came of a place where I had really struggled for most of my life and particularly throughout my high school years and teenage years with self-esteem. I struggled a lot with body image. It got to the point where I put myself in and out of hospital with disordered eating. And I struggled with feeling like I was a letdown to my family. Again, coming back to playing life by someone else's rules. I, from a very young age, fell into the impression that I was meant to be in the military because my dad's in the military and very accomplished there. His dad is in the police force. His dad was in the military. His dad was in my two career options were police force or military.
Yeah.
And part of me knew that that wasn't where I was meant to go. But as a result of it, I really struggled with my self-esteem around that. And that's what led me to become the guy who could almost just work the room and play the room and put the masks on and be what everyone else wanted him to be. And I remember one of my coaches early on sat me down and said, you're so busy trying to be the Declan that everyone else wants to see that you have no idea who the real Declan is anymore.
Which is what everyone does, right? And question, do you think that your parents expected you to go into police or army, or is that just an expectation that you set on yourself?
I don't think it was an expectation as much as I do think my father desired it. But it was never explicitly communicated.
Yeah.
So it was definitely something I created in my head as a story. My dad and I had some really tumultuous years as a result of it. I'm fortunate that now we have a fantastic relationship and we're really starting to connect as equals and as men, not just as this role of father and son.
Yeah, hierarchy.
Yes, but for a long time, I felt like I'd let him down. He felt like he'd let me down and we weren't having those conversations.
But here's the thing, right? So you had the guts to do what you wanted to do and kind of go against the grain. I feel like a lot of people would have done, joined the police and the military and their father would have been happy. But long term, they would have resented their father for the rest of their life. Whereas you might have had a few tough years with him, but now you're in a better space and you probably will be for the rest of your life. So you made that tough decision now, which is paying off long term, which I want the decision. That's what I want people to make. Question, is this what I really want to do?
And this is why I say being yourself authentically, vulnerably, openly is not only the greatest gift you can give yourself, it's the greatest gift you can give your loved ones because my dad now gets to know the real me.
Yeah, you're not wearing a mask.
Yeah. And I get to know him as the real him. And I think the connection that comes from that is beautiful and it's something that we need more, not just between obviously parents and their kids, but I think as a society, being able to just be real with each other and put the mask down, which I know is so scary. It's vulnerable because I like to think of it as taking the armor off as well.
Yeah.
And so often we're going around in life and we're armored up and we're like, no, you take off your armor first.
Yes.
You be vulnerable first, then I'll be vulnerable. It's like one of us has to make that move to go, hey, I'm going to be a little bit real here. Now, when I say vulnerability, I don't mean you go in and overshare your deepest, darkest fears and secrets.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just genuine and it's almost like you're not playing a social game anymore. the amount of energy I have now compared to what I used to have when I was younger, because so much of my energy was spent going, well, what do they think I'm going to say? Or what do they want me to say? Or how am I meant to do this? It's almost like as I was talking, I was evaluating myself.
Overthinking almost.
100%. I love overthinking is like just thinking about thinking. And eventually something will happen. Whereas now it's almost this state of flow. And we can oscillate between that. You can be in overthinking. I think you can also be in overdoing. We were talking before about that hustle and grind mentality. There's this really nice little space between overthinking and overdoing where instead of being a human thinking or a human doing, you're a human being. And that's what the world needs more of.
Because as Brene Brown says, and especially for men, being vulnerable is a strength. People think, oh, if I let my emotions down and I start crying and I be vulnerable, that's being weak, because that's how we associate, especially for men, because that's what we see in the movies. The men are always tough. It's always these big alpha males. My grandfather, I've never seen him cry. I probably never will, because that generation was so emotionally cut off. But it's actually strength to let yourself out and be vulnerable, which is a message that I think we need to be getting across a lot more.
And not only is it strength for us, again, I think of the ripple effect of all of this. There's a great quote by Marianne Williamson. I don't remember the whole thing, but it's, as we give ourselves permission to shine, we unconsciously give permission to those around us to do the same.
A changed life changes lives.
Exactly, right? And so as we put down that mask, it gives people an opportunity and a moment to also put down theirs. Now, whether or not they take it is not my responsibility. It's not my job. But I like being able to give people the space and the tools to be able to do that in a healthy way.
The space is so important because, environment dictates performance. There's always that quote that comes up, you are the 5 people you surround yourself with. If you're in a safe space, it's a lot easier to be vulnerable. If I was in a room with toxic guys, I probably wouldn't be vulnerable because they're probably going to, make fun of you or shut you down, and that's not a good place to do it. So if you feel like you can't be vulnerable around your friends, maybe you should have a think about, who you're hanging out with and if they are your true friends. I can say I can be vulnerable with all my friends, which is, I couldn't have said that 2 years ago, but I can say that now. And it takes a long time to get there, to meet those sort of people. But once you do, that's lifted up every aspect of my life, just having quality relationships around me. We were talking, I think with Luke, we're saying if all you did in your 20s was build meaningful relationships, you're ahead of the game. If that's all you did, it's a bare minimum. If you build quality relationships.
I love that, because I think so often in our late teens and early 20s, and I'm imagining a lot of listeners will resonate with this, there is a lot of pressure and expectation to focus on success, whatever success means to whoever's telling you it.
Subjective, right?
Right. Success means financial success or career success or whatever it may be. When we're so busy focusing on success, I think we lose sight of fulfillment. And that is one of the most powerful things we can do. So yeah, I agree. If we spend our 20s just forming deep, meaningful connections and relationships, not only with those around us, I would say if you spend your 20s forming a deep, meaningful connection and relationship with yourself, what a powerful thing to do, especially because we do as human beings, we do a second round of identity development, which is where we really challenge who we thought we were. It naturally happens. We start to explore the boundaries of who we are and what we believe in and our values. That happens between 18 and 25.
Really?
Yeah, because we come out of school. We normally in that age start to move out of home. We start to have a lot of these structures that were around us removed. And we have this space to start figuring out, well, who am I? What do I believe in? What do I want to do in my life? Like 18 to 25 is a really interesting time period.
It's a window of freedom, right?
Exactly. Well, psychologically, there's so much that can be done there, which is why I'm always so excited. We've got a few members at BU in their freshman year who are, I think our youngest at the moment is 19. We've got a few in their early 20s who are at uni or just about to finish uni. And they're going, I haven't learned these internal skill sets at any point in my education. I'm learning a lot of external skill sets and hard skills and tangible skills, but I'm not learning things like how to be happy. I'm not learning things about how to have meaningful conversations. I'm not learning things about authenticity, about forming healthy relationships. All the stuff that you talk about exactly on your podcast, which I think this is why I'm excited to be on this show, is it's a fantastic gift to give people as they go through that transition phase. I get so damn excited when I see someone start this journey at that age, because I'm like, you are literally in a window right now where you can change so much so quickly, and you can lay the foundations for a really happy and meaningful life. Like the best thing I ever did for myself was at 19, reach out to my coach and say, hey, I want some help.
So the reason I started the podcast and I know Brent started to Empower You was I was in the business world quite early, like 18, 19. I was at these events, networking and stuff. And something that every single time I'd have people come up to me and be like, man, I wish I had this when I was your age. I wish I had this stuff when I was your age, and now I'm only discovering it at 35 or 40. And so it's like, well, how can I get this information to younger people? And it's the same as you. When I see younger people, it's like, you guys have such a window of opportunity. And I'm talking, this is my favorite message. I read it probably once a week. I got a message from a 14-year-old girl who listens to the show, and she shared it with her parents and they listened to it together. It's like, if you're listening to this and doing stuff at 14, like, how could you not be successful in your eyes? Or like, how could you not be living a more fulfilling life? Because you're actively looking for information. I didn't start listening to podcasts until I was like 17 or 18. A lot of people I know still don't really do any sort of personal development at all. They just kind of trust in society and trust in the system, which, I think is a bit broken. But yeah, it's just, it's so important that we can figure out who we are. But how do we figure that out? Because once again, I always like to make it practical. We've said a few practical things here, but what are some practical tips that we can do to try to figure out who we are and be a bit more internally happy with ourselves?
I call them the big four. So there's 4 big questions to sit with and ask yourself. And if I'd encourage everyone listening to the show, if they did nothing off the back of this, but actually just went and sat down for a little bit, gave themselves a day away from external influence. I'm talking turn off your phone, go out into nature if need be, whatever it needs to be, and really deeply reconnect with yourself. There's a process called active journaling. So you get a trigger question, you write whatever the hell comes to mind, and then you go back and you sort of see what are the common themes between these, what keeps coming up naturally anyway. The 4 big questions that I'd use your prompt questions for that is 1, who do I want to be? Like, what is the kind of person I want to be? What is the kind of person I want to show up as? Right? What kind of impact do I want to make on the world? How do I want to be remembered by others when I'm gone? And what can I do to start moving me towards these?
Yeah, cool.
If you just went, okay, this is the kind of person I want to show up as, whatever it is, right? This is the kind of impact I want to make in the world. This is how I want to be remembered when I'm gone. And this is what I can do to move me towards it. That is such a fantastic starting point. It's not the end point by any means, but a starting point for putting together the bones and the structure of your unique blueprint for a happy and fulfilling life. Because I don't have the answer for what a happy and fulfilling life is for you. I can make suggestions based on the science and the research and the evidence, but you're the expert on yourself. I'll never be the expert on you. So if people went and actually just sat with those questions and started asking them that more, I think it would be amazing what people would realize about themselves, but also the flow-on effect of that, of what they can then give to the world.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll put a PDF for those questions so people can go fill that out for sure.
That would be fantastic.
But can I throw in one other question?
Yes.
This is my favorite question. If you were told you're going to die in 5 years' time, what would you do differently with your life? And I love 5 years because everyone always says, I act like I'm going to die tomorrow. And so if you really acted like that, wouldn't you be with your family or be doing something
chaotic?
Exactly. And if you say, I'll just go travel for the rest of my life. But 5 years is long enough where you go, wow, I've got to think about what I want to do. And so that's such a great question. I think I heard on Seth Godin or Tim Ferriss or something, they were asking that question. And I use that question on helping people figure out what they want to do in their careers, along with those 4 questions, what I think are amazing. And that's what I think we should be learning in school. Like, how hard is it? You could do in 50 minutes, you could do that session. That's all it takes.
Yeah. And then it's about identifying, I said, go back and read back through it, find the common themes and ask yourself, am I living in alignment with this?
Yeah.
What you may find in that is either beliefs will come up or values will come up, or maybe both. But way to tell the difference, beliefs are normally a sentence. Values are single words. So there might be a single word that just keeps coming up. Like it might be community, it might be impact, it might be giving, it might be family, whatever it is. Grab that, right? I think of values as not these kind of wishy-washy, let's just choose some nice sounding words to say this is how I'm going to live my life. No, values is about finding a core 5, approximately, like 3 to 7, but let's say 5 core words that you're like, if I lived in alignment with this consistently, I would be really happy with how I'm living. And those 5 are going to be different for everyone. It's almost like just coming back to a bit of a compass rather than feeling like we're a little bit aimless in life. We can come back and go, have I been intentional with these 5 this week? It acts as a really nice self-reflection tool. And if you're finding you're really struggling with those, I mean, there's so many resources. Brené Brown, who you mentioned earlier, who I love as a researcher, has some amazing resources just around, here is a list of human values.
Yeah.
Find the ones that resonate with you.
And it's the 6 human needs, right?
Yes.
I forget what they are, but like contribution, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think Robbins Research Center, so Tony Robbins came out with those. So there's certainty, variety, connection, significance, growth, and contribution.
That's it, yeah. And when I heard those, I was like, oh yeah, that's so important. Significance, we want to be significant as humans. We want to contribute. It's a big one. If we're not contributing to anything, you can feel kind of, what am I doing? I'm just doing it for the money, or am I just doing it for this? And I think that's a huge one with Gen Z. episode 7 on the show, I had a woman and she specializes in helping generational flow in the workforce. So how to kind of bring in young people and have them work together with the older generations and vice versa. And she just talked about some fascinating stuff all around that and how young people are actually way more likely to be incentivized with stuff outside of money. So the example she used was a dentist, and the assistant, he wanted her to take more control of something, and he kept giving her money and she didn't do it. And then what he ended up doing was she gave her permission to like run his website for her. And so now she's running the website and she's going to be creative and she gets to kind of let go like that. And so it's like thinking outside of the box, because Gen Zs and millennials are also far less likely to be inclined by money and more by, mission and purpose.
Yeah, I think it's now, especially with our work, I think it's the 5th highest reason, or maybe it's not even 5 anymore, but I know it's nowhere near in the top 3 of what actually matters to us and what we want to do with our career. I will mention on the values part though, and with the human needs, if you're listening to this, I'd encourage you to also be mindful about how you meet those values, because you can meet them in a really unhealthy way or a really healthy way. So for example, let's choose something like significance. You can be really unhealthy about how you go about being significant in your life. You can almost borderline arrogance. I've seen people, one of their core values, a great example of this actually, I did a lot of work with someone who had tried for years to break their pattern of drug dependence, and nothing had worked. And I was the first professional they worked with who said, you're doing this for a very valid reason, so let's find out what the valid reason is. Every other professional was like, you shouldn't be doing this. It's just like, I know I shouldn't be doing this. And they're like, well, there's no good reason to do drugs. And I'm like, no, there's a very good reason to do it. And it's in there. That's why you're doing it.
Of course.
Your brain doesn't want to screw everything up. It's doing this for a positive intention. Let's find out what it is. And it's funny, when we dug down, one of her core values in life was rebellion. She liked going against the grain. She liked being a little bit counterculture.
Did she have protective parents or something?
I didn't know much about her background. We didn't even, that's the beauty of this. A lot of the work we do in positive psychology doesn't need to look heaps back into your past. It's how do we move forward into your future from here?
That's what I was talking with someone about this with often in therapy and stuff, they'll go, say they had an abusive relationship with their father or mother, and they'll be like, you started an abusive relationship, and the therapist will go, tell me about that. And they'll just go back into their mind and they'll tell it, so what happened here? And they'll just go back in the past and the past and the past. And this guy I was talking to who's done some coaching and stuff, he says, well, I like to flip it. Like I would say, okay, you had an abusive relationship. What's one positive thing that came out of that? And they go, no, nothing. She was horrible. She treated me like crap and all this stuff. And just humor me. What's one positive thing that could have came out of it? And she'd go, oh, well, actually, because of that, this happened and I met my boyfriend now. And because of my boyfriend, I've now got this happening and this. And suddenly it just bang, 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 positive, 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 positive. So rather than focusing on the negative that you just mentioned in the past, we're focusing on the future and the positive. A great example that he used was he was at a coaching thing. And this guy put his hand up. He was complaining about how he'd given $1 million to his ex-wife in their divorce. And he's still pissed off about it. This is 6-7 years ago. He's still pissed off. He had to give $1 million. He's still kind of paying it off. And the guy goes, okay, but you're now remarried. And he goes, and you've got two beautiful boys, correct? He goes, yes. If I was to give you $1 million for one of your boys, would you do that? And he goes, of course not. I love my boys. Well, that's essentially what you just did. That $1 million, you paid $1 million and now you've got a beautiful wife and 2 beautiful kids. Which is like you focus on the positive rather than focusing on the negative, which I think is what we need to do in the world because there's so much negative, especially with the news.
And it's also, I think there's a time and place and it is beneficial to revisit our past, but I'm a huge believer in the saying, I use this a lot with our members, you can honor your past without being a slave to it.
Yeah.
So let's honor it. Let's recognize that, yes, potentially there have been some things that happened that are not fair. They weren't your fault.
Of course.
And they've had an impact. I'm a huge believer in the saying, it's not your fault, but what you do with it moving forward from here is your responsibility.
How you react.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So regardless of what happened in your past, it may not be your fault, but how you're going to move forward as a human being, what you're going to do with it, that is entirely your responsibility. And yes, you can get people in your corner and professionals and friends and social support networks to back you in that. But at the end of the day, the onus comes back to you. I can't force happiness down anyone's throat. I can't change anything for them. All I can do is give them access to the right team of people and to the right tools. And if they take ownership and they take responsibility, beautiful things happen.
You're in full control of your life. And how many examples are there of people who, there's that guy, Nick, I forget his name, but he's born without any arms or legs, right? He could have just, given up. Easy. No one would have blamed him if he gave up. No one. But, he's built a huge career. He's got kids. He's got a family. He's a professional speaker. And there's so many examples of like, I just saw on TV a woman who was, she was born with like 3rd-degree burns and she's like missing her hand. And then she got hit by a car when she was like 11 years old. And she could come up with every excuse to justify why she's not where she wants to be. And no one would blame her because of the stuff that's happened to her. But when the interview asked her, like, are you happy or are you lucky? She goes, yes, I'm very lucky. You know, I'm sitting here, I'm very lucky. And you see people who have everything and they'll complain that they're unlucky because one little thing happened. They got stuck in traffic or whatever.
And straight away, all of those examples highlight something that we've spoken about on Clubhouse before, but like one of the most powerful tools that we can utilize to tap into happiness and a meaningful life is gratitude. And all those examples share that. They're like, of course, I'm lucky. Of course, I'm happy. Of course, I'm grateful to be here. If we focus more on what we have already in front of us and around us, and we practice deep, deep gratitude for it, the world would be a better place.
Yeah. Focus on what we can control rather than what we can't control.
100%.
Great example again in the traffic. I love this example. If you get stuck in traffic, and it can be very frustrating, right? You can't control the traffic, but you can control what you do while you're stuck in the traffic. So you could be like, all right, I've got an extra 20 minutes. I can call my grandma. I can listen to a podcast. I could do stuff that I haven't had time to do. I could jump on Clubhouse, right? So you can take that time which you can control, but you can't control the traffic. So focus on what you can control and the positive. But I know I've heard a few of your tips, but I'd love for the listeners to hear, when it comes to gratitude, what are some practical, tips or advice you'd give for people who want to, try be happy with themselves and have more gratitude in their life?
I know I said just before, if your listeners did nothing off the back of this except go sit with those big 4 questions,
Yeah.
I'm about to say if they do nothing off the back of this podcast but this, so maybe let's do both.
Yeah, do both.
Go sit with the questions, but also start a gratitude practice. Now, what that looks like is you can do it as a written journal. You can do it as something where you share it. I heard a family the other day was saying they do it over dinner, which I think is just so wholesome and so beautiful. Wow. You can do it verbally. So I actually use an audio recording app I speak better than I write. Mm-hmm. But what it is you write down 3 things or you share 3 things that you're grateful for that day and why. Now, that's the kicker. A lot of people make the mistake, they just go, I'm grateful for breakfast. It's like, whoop-de-doo, everyone's grateful for breakfast, who cares? You need to put the why you're grateful for it to actually get the psychological response and the benefit. If you're really struggling with that, because I want to recognize there's probably going to be people listening to this podcast who sit down on some days and go, I cannot think of anything.
For sure.
And I want to highlight straight if you're listening and you're like, man, I can't think of anything in my life to be grateful for. It's okay. You're not alone. I find it can help rather than starting with a blank canvas and asking your brain, be grateful for something. Your brain's like, dude, I have nowhere to lead with this, to give yourself little prompts. So I know when I was really struggling, my little prompts were, what is one small thing I'm grateful for today that I may have missed if I wasn't looking for it? And so we're looking for the little moments. Why am I grateful for it? Also, my next prompt was, who is someone that I'm grateful for today and why? And it can be deep and meaningful in someone in your family. Or I remember one time I wrote on mine, I'm grateful for the checkout chick at Woolies because she was so inappropriate when I was buying my groceries and it just made me laugh. Like I was buying a cucumber and a few other things and they were arranged in a bit of a, sexually explicit way on a little conveyor belt thing. Yeah. And she was so inappropriate and I just laughed and we had this nice little moment together where we laughed and it was funny. The third prompt was and this is the hardest one, but the most beneficial. If you really struggle with this, I'd encourage you to sit with it and really lean into the discomfort of doing it because it is the most beneficial for your happiness. The third is, what is something about myself that I'm grateful for today and why?
As we mentioned, we were our toughest critic.
Exactly.
That's why it's the hardest one.
Yeah. And so it could be a characteristic. It could be physical. It could be personal. It could be big or small. Like you don't have to put the pressure on yourself to come up with these mind-blowing, light bulb, big, deep, meaningful ones every day. I kid you not, I've written in mine before, I am grateful for the fact that I have a relatively even beard line. Like when I grow stubble, it's not patchy.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful for that because now I have more options for my facial hair that I choose to wear.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was patchy, maybe I'd just be clean shaven all the time. So again, you don't have to put the pressure on yourself to be like, okay, brain, find these really meaningful answers all the time. But the actual practice of doing that every day, and by the way, be self-compassionate with yourself. I'm a researcher on happiness. I've been practicing this for years. I'd be lying to your whole audience if I say I do this 7 days a week. I don't. I set the intention to, and I miss some days. What happens is not only do you get the benefit of doing that practice, but you'll start to train your brain to look for more opportunities.
Yes, reticular activating system in your brain. You're now subconsciously aware. The same way you have a car and you start seeing that car everywhere, if you start practicing and preaching gratitude every morning, you're going to start noticing that. Or maybe you do it at night. And so throughout the day, you're subconsciously looking for those moments of gratitude. Yeah. So you're happier as a person.
My favorite thing happens after people do this for about 7 to 14 days. They'll have a moment where as they're going throughout their normal day-to-day life, they'll go, that's something that I can put in my gratitude journal
exactly.
tonight. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And then there'll be other days when they're like, Declan, I have more than 3. Can I put more than 3 in? I'm like, let's just hold up for a second. 14 days ago, you told me you were struggling to find 3. And now you're having moments where there's more than 3. Like, what the hell's going on here?
How simple is the exercise?
Yeah. That's the beautiful thing. That's what I love about it. Again, simplicity is beauty when it comes to happiness and building our happiness. Yes, let's ask those big, deep, meaningful questions that we spoke about before, the big 4. But let's also do the simple, beautiful practices that if we do them consistently, we're going to be happier.
Which is what I talked about in my goal setting episode. How do we achieve massive goals one step at a time? A goal is just, small steps compounded over time. And so by doing the gratitude journal, it's a small thing you can do regularly and continually train your brain to look for happier moments in your life. And I think the point you made about how the third question is the hardest, what are you happy about yourself? It's such an Australian thing as well, very tall poppy syndrome sort of thing. It's very, very hard to talk about ourselves without coming across as like a douche or egotistical. Even when I find, because I journal now and I write stuff about that, even when I find I journal, I know no one else is going to see this, I still struggle to write stuff that I'm happy about what I did because I feel I'm being egotistical. So you're not being egotistical, you're just becoming self-aware of what you're good at, which is important because so many people in a job interview, I feel like when they get asked the question, what are your strengths and weaknesses? I'll go, I can tell you my weaknesses. So you tell them, I'm not that good at this. They'll try to be humble. We'll say, what are you good at? And they're like, and they'll I'm kind of good at communication. They won't have a strong answer for it, which is what my mum's been seeing with some of the people she interviews. And it's like, why are you focusing on your weaknesses and not your strengths? Because they don't want to come across as egotistical.
Yeah, and this is a common thing. I think we're raised from a young age. I know I was told to not be arrogant.
That's it, yeah, arrogant.
And I think what we've accidentally done as a society is raised people to see arrogance and confidence and charisma as the same thing. Now, the difference between them, genuine confidence, genuine charisma, comes from within and there's alignment there. What I'm saying and how I'm acting and how I'm showing up is aligned with what I genuinely believe about myself. I find arrogance is a massive front. So there is false confidence. I became a pro over years at putting on the false confidence mask. Yeah. I could play that game inside out. But inside myself, my inner monologue, how I was talking to myself, what I believed about myself, didn't line up.
So I guess always you can see it. People have a lot of insecurities when they put on that false confidence mask. I think it's very obvious, and maybe there's a lot of people I can't see it with, but I feel like you can tell when you see it. You can tell they're insecure, even though they're acting like the most confident person in the room.
Yeah, you can feel it too.
Yeah, it's energy, right?
Yeah, I find a lot, people are drawn to people who are charismatic. And I go, well, what's charisma other than just authenticity? It's showing up as your true self. It's funny, I had someone the other day go, you know what I find interesting about you, Declan? I was like, what's that? He's like, no matter where I interact with you, you're the same dude. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, if you're at a dinner party, if you're on social media, if you're on a podcast, if we're in a coaching session, if we're catching up for coffee, you're basically the same guy the whole time. Like there might be subtle different changes in facets, but like, I know I'm more, like there's a consistency there. I know I'm getting Declan each time, right? I'm not getting the Declan who's trying to play by someone else's rules. Exactly, right? So I think, again, that's why I keep looping back to the greatest gift that we can give ourselves, our loved ones, and the world as a whole is to be ourselves. Again, how we go about that, well, that's where happiness comes in. That's where emotional intelligence comes in. That's where conflict resolution, that's where all these skills that you share on this podcast come in as a path to living a life that is true to us, that is authentic, and that is deeply, deeply happy and fulfilling.
Awesome, man. So this has been an amazing chat. I hope some people got some value out of this. I have personally. Before I wrap up, I ask every guest on the show the final question, and it can be completely unrelated to what we've spoken about today. But what would your number one piece of advice be for the younger generation?
It's the one we've just been talking about for this whole episode. Be you. Yeah. Be yourself. Stop playing life by other people's rules. Create your blueprint for what happiness and success means. And then show up with that.
And authenticity is key, especially in the world right now. The most authentic people with the highest level of authenticity are successful. I see on TikTok, if you want to be successful on TikTok, be authentic. That's when people follow. We're getting sick of this, bullshit stuff on Instagram of people faking their lives, the Kardashian sort of thing. People are getting sick of it. They want to see more authenticity, especially in COVID times when they're, as you mentioned before, we've never been less connected. Obviously, COVID has, had a big role on that. But it's so important. Just be yourself. Be you, as your company says.
Exactly.
Awesome, man. Well, for anyone who wants to find out more, we're going to put some PDFs in the description. I'm also going to put the link to your happiness scorecard.
Amazing, yes.
So what is the happiness scorecard? Do you want to give us a quick rundown of that?
Yeah, so the happiness scorecard is a evidence-based test that my team and I have been developing that has now just been aligned with the university. So it's a 7-minute test that people can take that will actually spit out your happiness score. We're big believers in the saying, what you measure, you can manage. And before this, people didn't have an easy way to measure their happiness over time.
Yeah.
This gives them not only their happiness score, but the different types of happiness. It tells them what their greatest happiness strengths are, what their gaps are, so their opportunities to grow their happiness. This is the gift that we wanted to bring to the world. So we decided to launch it for free. And we've actually decided this week that we're going to keep it for free forever so that people can utilize this as a tool to not only measure their happiness, but track it over time and most importantly, improve it. So I would love for everyone who listens to this to take it.
Yeah, and I did it. It's awesome. As you mentioned, it's 5 to 7 minutes, just answer some questions, scale of 1 to 10. Great questions, deep questions. It spits out like a 6-7 page report, which gives you, a whole bunch of information about what you need to improve on, what how internally happy you are, and all this different stuff. Super, super fascinating. It's free, very easy. So guys, go check it out. But otherwise, if they want to get in contact with you, where's the best place to go and find out more information about your company?
So they can go straight to the website, BU Coaching. So just that is bucoaching.org, or they can check us out on social media, BU_coaching on Instagram and Facebook, or of course, connect with me, Declan Edwards _BU on Instagram. And I also have a podcast called BU with Declan Edwards.
Yeah.
We're into our 4th season now. It's about to launch. So feel free to come listen to that as well.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed this conversation, go jump over there, shoot him a message. Otherwise, Declan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Appreciate it, man.
Thanks so much for listening to this entire episode. That is crazy you decided to stick around for so long. I hope you got some value out of that episode, and I just wanted to let you know, if you are enjoying the show, but you want to take your learning to the next level, I'm running a 6-week coaching program specifically for the listeners of this show. Over 6 weeks, we cover how I have grown my network and met so many amazing people, how to organize your money and invest. I help you figure out what you want to do with your life and give you some career guidance. We do goal setting and set you up with some awesome goals and so much more. I keep these groups very, very small so you all get some one-on-one time with me personally. And if you're interested and want to find out more or apply, just go to www.drivenyoung.com/coach. That is www.drivenyoung.com/coach. The link is in the show notes below. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening to this episode. It's so awesome you stayed all the way to the end. I love you and all the best.